If you could turn back time more than 5,000 years and stand in the middle of a prehistoric battle, what would you see? There are no guns, no cannons, no explosions. Just wild shouts and the dull thuds of stone axes and wooden clubs clashing. Then, somewhere in Mesopotamia, a warrior appears. In his hand is something strange, a metal axe that glints red under the sun. When he swings it, the sound isn't just a thud, it's the sound of a new era. Stone tools had served humanity for hundreds of thousands of years. They were useful, but limited. They were brittle, prone to cracking, and impossible to sharpen finely. And then, one spark in a kiln changed everything. Someone, experimenting, or perhaps by accident, noticed strange stones melting into a glowing liquid. They didn't know it was metal, but they felt something different. At first, it was used for jewelry or ritual objects. Beautiful, yes, but too soft to cut. Then, at some point, someone discovered alloying copper with tin, and bronze was born. It was harder, sharper, more durable. A metal weapon could cleave rock, pierce leather armor, and more importantly, instill fear. That moment marked the turning point. Metal weapons didn't just change battles, they shifted power. Whoever controlled them gained dominance. Leaders, warriors, priests, they rose. Civilizations such as Egypt, Sumer, Babylon all took shape under armies wielding blades and shields forged from metal. Humanity's story turned on that gleaming metal, and the clang of bronze resonated through the ages. They weren't heroes on the battlefield. Their names were rarely carved into stone, but they changed the course of history, not with swords, but with fire, wind, and stone. They were the first metalworkers. In small villages across Mesopotamia, along the rivers Tigris and Euphrates, some began to notice a strange phenomenon. Certain rocks, when heated in fire hot enough, would melt. The heat needed was intense, over 1,000 degrees Celsius. So they built primitive furnaces. They used animal skin bellows to pump air. They mixed dry charcoal to push the flames higher. And from that fire, glowing metal flowed, red as blood, heavy, alive. Those who controlled that process held immense power. In the eyes of their neighbors, they weren't just craftsmen. They were almost gods. In some tribes, these early metalworkers became priests. In others, they were feared, whispered about as sorcerers. After all, they could turn stone into something that could kill. At first, metal weapons were rare and sacred. Only the most powerful had access: chiefs, warlords, kings. Metal swords were not just tools. They were symbols. A bronze blade meant authority. A copper helmet meant rank. To bury someone with a metal axe was to say, this man held power, even in death. Later came the Hittites. Around 1500 BC, in the land of Anatolia, they discovered how to forge iron. Unlike bronze, iron was stronger and more abundant. You didn't need tin anymore, and that changed everything. The Hittites tried to keep the secret. For decades, iron was their national advantage. But empires fall. Around 1200 BC, the Sea Peoples invaded. The Hittite Empire crumbled, and the secret of iron, it spread like wildfire. Soon, iron weapons reached Babylon, Egypt, Greece, even China. In each culture, metal took a new form. The Greeks used short stabbing swords and massive round shields. The Assyrians favored heavy axes and chariots. In China's Western Zhou dynasty, swords were cast with twin edges, inlaid with jade, etched with sacred symbols. And war changed. It was no longer chaos. It became structure, discipline. Iron weapons gave birth to organized armies. Organized armies gave birth to empires. There was a time when just a few warriors on chariots, armed with metal blades, could bring down entire civilizations. Picture Egypt, the New Kingdom era. Mighty pharaohs, monumental pyramids, an empire that believed it was untouchable. And yet, from the north came a small, fast-moving army, Hittite riders, wielding something Egypt had never seen before: swords of iron, sharp enough to split bronze shields like paper. The Battle of Kadesh, 1274 BC. Egypt versus Hittites, two massive civilizations. But it wasn't just about numbers, it was about technology. This was the first large-scale war where both sides used metal weapons, not wood, not stone. Chariots clashed, blades rang, shields dented, blood spilled, and history changed forever. From that point, weapons of metal were no longer personal tools. They became state power. Empires like Assyria, Babylon, and Persia began mass-producing metal weapons. They opened mines, built furnaces, trained standing armies. Weapons were designed to be modular, sword hilts that detached, spearheads forged in layers, shields that could absorb blows. Iron changed everything. The Hittites once guarded their secrets like gold, but when they fell to the Sea Peoples around 1200 BC, the knowledge spread. In just a few centuries, the Iron Age had begun, and the world would never be the same. Meanwhile, in China, the West was not alone. By the spring and autumn period, Chinese swordsmiths were creating masterpieces: double-edged bronze swords, inlaid with jade, inscribed with poems, gods, and emblems of power. These weren't just weapons. They were works of art. They were spirit. In the Mediterranean, tactics evolved too. The Greeks built phalanx formations, rows of long spears, shields interlocked. Later, the Romans introduced legions, highly trained, fast-moving units. Each soldier carried a gladius, a short, deadly stabbing sword, compact, precise, brutal. The design wasn't just clever, it was made to kill, efficiently. Between 1500 BC and the early centuries AD, metal didn't just forge weapons, it forged empires. War, whether won or lost, always leaves scars. But when metal weapons appeared, the scars ran deeper, not just across bodies, but across entire societies. After every battle, one thing became clear. Those who held the blades survived. Those who didn't were forgotten. Metal didn't just cut through armor. It split people apart. A new line was drawn between those who had metal and those who didn't. Peasants, who grew food, who kept society running, weren't allowed to own weapons. In many places, they weren't even allowed to touch them. So power concentrated. Warriors, nobles, kings. They rose higher. And the rest fell silent. Metal weapons reshaped society. In China, a man with a beautiful sword was said to have virtue. In Japan, a sword was part of the samurai's soul. In Europe, swords were blessed in knighting ceremonies, touched by clergy, kissed by kings. To carry a weapon of metal was to carry status, honor, identity. But there was a darker side. When weapons became power, armies became independent. And sometimes, they turned on their own rulers. In the Roman Empire, emperors were often betrayed by their own soldiers, sold for coins. Metal didn't just protect the throne. Sometimes, it took it. Outside the battlefield, life changed too. Metal crept into daily life. Knives, tools, farming blades, household goods. The age of wood and stone quietly ended. Metal was everywhere. But more metal meant more crime. Cities passed laws to restrict weapons. In ancient Greece, owning a sword came with strict regulation. In China, only nobles could carry blades in public. Metal became a line in the sand, one more way to divide people. It even touched faith. In some cultures, metal was believed to come from the gods. The Celts threw swords into rivers to honor spirits. Egyptians buried warriors with weapons for the afterlife. In Hindu mythology, Vishwakarma, the divine smith, forged weapons for gods. And so, the blacksmith's work became sacred. Across the world, metal weapons turned into legend. Gujian's sword in China, Excalibur in Britain. They weren't just tools of war. They were symbols of power, justice, destiny. But for every legendary sword, there were thousands more. Wielded by nameless hands, forged by slaves, swung in silence. History was not only written by those who held swords, but also stained by those who never got to. One day you might find yourself in a museum, in London, Paris, Beijing, or Cairo, standing in front of an old sword behind glass. No blood, no sound, just rusted metal lying still. But if you listen, it's still speaking. It doesn't speak of killing. It speaks of craft, of legacy, of the people who made it, people who poured fire, sweat, and soul into every curve of the blade. Take the sword of Gujian, over 2,000 years old. So sharp, it can still cut paper. So detailed, it's inlaid with blue crystals, made with no electricity, no modern tools, and yet, perfection. How do they do it? Even today, metallurgists ask that same question. These weapons weren't just weapons. They were identity. They showed who you were, not just in battle, but in culture, in faith, in how you lived. In the West, legends grew. Excalibur, the sword of destiny, forged not by man, but gifted by gods. It wasn't real, but it didn't matter. It stood for something higher: justice, honor, rightful power. Even architecture carried metal's spirit. Temple roofs curled like blades. Greek columns were carved with axe shapes. Metal was no longer just material. It became meaning. Today we live in the age of machines, guns, drones, high-tech weapons. But deep down, nothing's changed. We still forge. We still fight. We still choose how to use power. Because a sword doesn't bring justice. A human hand does. Metal is just a tool. In the right hands, it defends. In the wrong ones, it destroys. And that choice, it's still ours to make. Across Asia, some still keep the old ways alive. Japanese katana makers, Vietnamese blacksmith villages. They don't forge to kill anymore. They forge to remember. Each strike of the hammer is history echoing back. Each blade, a story. And in every old sword, one question remains. What do we fight for? History has a strange rhythm. Stone became bronze. Bronze became iron. Then came gunpowder, cannons, nukes, lasers, drones, AI. And still, one question keeps coming back. What will we do with power? Ancient swords were not just weapons. They were mirrors. They showed who we were, what we believed, and what we feared. We forged them to survive. Then we forged legends around them. Then we locked them behind glass. Not because we forgot, but because maybe, just maybe, we hoped that someday we wouldn't need them again. And yet the world today still runs on the edge of a blade. Nations build weapons faster than they build trust. Technology grows. But wisdom, that's slower. Still, something has changed. People now ask questions the ancients never did. Not how do we win, but should we fight at all? That's why old swords still matter. Not because they kill, but because they remind us. They remind us of kings who rose and fell, of empires built with iron and undone by arrogance, of warriors remembered and civilians forgotten. Maybe somewhere, in a cave or desert or forest, A fragment of a blade still lies buried, waiting for someone to find it, to hold it, to ask, who held this last? Why was it dropped? Or maybe, right now, in a lab or a forge or a digital battlefield, a new kind of weapon is being shaped. Smaller, smarter, deadlier, but still just a tool. It's not evil, it's not good, it's just waiting for a hand to choose. And maybe that hand is yours. But is that the whole story?